Herzlich willkommen zurück in der Main Hall. Wir haben jetzt als Sprecher den Daniel. Er sagt, es ist Zeit, den siloartigen Ansatz für organisatorische Veränderungen zu beenden. Sein Beitrag von PMO zu VMO. Ich weiß nicht, was VMO ist, das heißt, ich bin ganz gespannt, was jetzt kommt. Daniel, your stage.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good to see you. Let me start by saying Sabine was a hard act to follow, right? I mean, speaking right after Sabine is going to be a challenge. What I can say is, die Sabine hat gefragt, worauf sind Sie stolz? Für mich, die Antwort ist einfach so. Ich bin stolz, dass ich hier als Kanada gereist bin und habe die Chance, für euch hier zu sprechen und diese Präsentation zu geben. Vorweg ein Geständnis. Ich wollte die ganze Präsentation auf Deutsch heute halten. Aber als ich mich vorbereitet habe, habe ich gemerkt und war mir das jedoch klar, dass es würde ein bisschen schwierig, ein übergestimmtes Drehbuch auf Deutsch zu folgen. Also, ich fand das wichtiger, dass ihr mich mit mehr Energie und mehr spontan auf Englisch sehen könnten, als dass ich unbedingt die ganze Sache auf Deutsch machte. Wenn das bei dir alles okay ist, dann mein Vorschlag ist, die Folien sind auf Deutsch, aber ich werde über diesen deutschen Folien die Präsentation das auf Englisch geben, weil es, wie gesagt, ne? Okay. So gut. Also fangen wir an. Machen wir so ein bisschen Magic. Turn this to, where do I point? Where do I point? Here? No? Ah, there we go. A little bit of magic. Jetzt ist es auf Deutsch, aber ich werde, wie gesagt, auf Englisch reden. So, from a PMO, we all know what a PMO is, to a VMO, Value Management Office. So what this is going to be about, and there's going to be many subtopics. As project management professionals, I look at you and I see so many years of experience in front of me. So the topics I think that I'm going to be bringing up are going to be of keen interest to you. So this is about moving away from a paradigm where strategy is disconnected from its execution. What do I mean by that? First off, just a little context setting. In March 2023, the PMI came out with a study around the concept of what constitutes a PMO in modern companies today, modern organizations. And what they found in this study is that there are many, many different kinds of PMOs. They found that some of the names are project management office, yes, but also program management, portfolio management, enterprise project management, agile center of excellence, et cetera, et cetera. And these percentages, it's a bit small. They don't add up because many organizations have many of these different offices working together, or not working together mostly, actually. And you'll notice there's no VMO. If you do a Google search on VMO, you'll most likely be directed towards procurement pages. So it's a fairly recent phenomenon. The first manifestation started in 2015, and it's still a phenomenon that is at the beginning of the adoption curve. So this is just a little bit of history to set our context. Classic PMOs are under stress. You may or may not recognize yourself in this illustration, but many project management professionals feel besieged. We feel that our careers are under pressure, that our roles are under pressure, that the talent and the skills, the experience we've acquired over the years are now being challenged like never before. And there is some truth to this, and we're going to investigate why that is. Let's look at some structures in organizations first. The first familiar structure, and I'm sure it's going to be familiar to you, is we have the classic, the executive committee decides upon a yearly strategy with 17 projects billed as priority number 1, 23 projects billed as priority number 2, and 73 projects billed as priority number 3. The problem with this is it's not very mathematical. There can only be one project which is priority 1. The next project should be priority what? 2. I've seen companies have so many projects billed as priority 1 that they actually invented priority 0. I don't know if you've seen this, but I've seen this, right? So that's the first thing. This year, this whole year of strategy being decided behind closed doors, and then what happens? They bring this over, dump it on the PMO's desk. Okay, now execute. And we want some statuses. That's the simple model. Let's look at another model you guys will recognize. Large organizations, multiple PMOs. I mostly have worked in the financial industry, both as project management and agile coach, agile organizational coach. And in the large financial institutions I've worked in, there's a PMO for every line of business. There's a PMO for brokerage. There's a PMO for banking. There's a PMO for insurance. There's a PMO for credit cards. There's a PMO for auto insurance. And then you have this big yearly planning at the executive stage, and then multiple, boom, okay, here's the banking strategy for this year, boom, here's the insurance strategy. And what happens then at the bottom? Right? These multiple PMOs are now competing in a hostile environment for survival, for resources, for attention, etc. And still, they're not decision makers. The decisions are still made on top. Let's make it worse. We're going to make it better. I'm not here just to tell you about problems that you already know about. I'll be offering solutions. But let's make it worse before we make it better. Multiple business PMOs with multiple shadow IT PMOs. Although in IT they don't usually call them PMOs, it's a delivery organization office. So then, let's say that this one on the left is banking. You have the banking business PMO, and you have the banking business IT delivery office. And the delivery offices in the IT sphere are also competing for resources. So all of this war for resources, war for attention, war for organizational prevalence is happening underneath the covers, as it were. This is a very unsustainable model, yet it's been lasting for decades. So all of these structures, this way of thinking, strategy on top, execution on bottom, be quiet and do what we said, there's 17 priority ones. This is thinking that was made for an era when change moved at this speed, where the markets moved at this speed, when the competition moved at this speed. You could do it then. Even then it was, So it's certainly not an approach that will work at the change of speed today. Right? And obviously it is not, definitely not, an approach that is going to work at the change of speed of next week. So, where do we go from here? Well, this is where the subject of this talk we're going to delve into a bit deeper now. What if we move away from the idea of a subservient PMO which lacks authority, which lacks decisional capabilities, and which lacks an ability to give an imprint on the organization's direction? What if we started looking at the PMO as the beginning stage of an organizational entity that could concentrate not just on execution, but on the actual creation of value, and we're going to look into what value means in a minute, and how do we actually know we've delivered that value? I don't know about you, but also the years of traditional project management that I spent my career in, we were very good at status, we were very good at scope, but we were very poor at actually calculating have we actually achieved the value? Who's counting up the benefits? It was mostly, is it on scope, is it on time, is it within budget? But nobody seemed to be worrying about did the customer at the end get the value. So let's start thinking of the PMO as the first stepping stone towards an organizational entity that looks at value. All right? The other thing, and we're going to see this in a minute in a sort of a matrix that I've created, basically. What we need, that new organizational entity, which we're calling a value management office for now, is something that goes through all the layers of hierarchy in the organization, and also against the silos. So we saw the silos earlier with multiple PMOs amongst lines of business. But even within a single line of business, there are hierarchies, there are levels of decision making. So a true VMO, whose job it is to make sure we're delivering value at the end, would actually cross the chasm and cross the bridges, create bridges across the silos and vertically in terms of the hierarchy. And I'm having trouble with my eyes here. Okay, so excuse me. I have cataract surgery in a month, so right now I can see just a blur of people, and also it's in German, so sometimes. And we also need to get away from basically we need to create a space where that decision making across the silos and in terms of the hierarchy, where there is a clear common space where we can decide, where we can discuss, where we can create transparency and not be imprisoned by all these divisions. So, I'm just going to look at it this way. This is where we basically break that cycle and create that space, as we were saying, what that space is a forum for, or what can happen in that space, is contrarily to a PMO which just executes. This space, this coordinated new body, will have the ability not only just to execute, but to help analyze, to help prioritize, to help finance, and to help decide where we're going. What are we doing? How are we, as a full organization, clearly and consciously together, going to basically deliver value over time? So I'm going to illustrate this with something that we've created called the Transformation Alignment Canvas. I love the German version. Look at that. One of the reasons I started learning German was my fascination for these composite words, the Transformationsausrichtungsraster. It's beautiful. I mean, it's just fascinating to me. That's why I started learning German, as I said. So, the Transformation Alignment Canvas. What does it look like? Basically very simple. On the vertical axis, you have impact. Across, you have time. All right? So if we look at local one-function changes for a single team's ways of working, you're going to be in the lower left-hand corner. You're going to have small scale, low impact, and very low benefits. As we move across scale, as we move up in impact, the benefits of working this way, in terms of value realization, are going to increase. This actually should be like more exponential, but for simplicity, I've made it a straight up arrow. Now, yes, there are benefits from day one. Even at the small scale, low impact, what's going to happen is from the teams, you're going to get more engagement. That's where Agile lives, Team Agile. right? More engagement, and we'll see what that looks like in a minute. You're going to get slightly better delivery acceleration when you get to the teams and projects and multi-project delivery scope when you start looking at your governance processes. The real magic occurs when you start looking at culture, at vision, and when you're doing it at the enterprise scale. So let's just clear this off for a second. So here's an experience that I've lived in at least 2 organizations where there was an IT transformation towards Agile at scale. Doesn't matter which methodology. There's many of them. There's SAFe, there's LESS, there's Scrum at Scale, there's Nexus, all the Agile methodologies which begin in the team. Right? So you've got local ways of working, and you've got basically teams. In this case, in both these organizations, it was a very IT sort of transformation. The sort of thing that we've been seeing in the Agile space for 25 years. No more project management, no more leaders, no more managers. If we just do Scrum, everything's going to change. Well, the French Revolution also gave us Napoleon, right? And Waterloo, and the restoration of monarchy. So for 25 years, this has not worked. I don't care what anyone says, it's not working. 70% of Agile transformations fail, according to McKinsey. And the other 30%, I'd love to see where they're happening, because I really haven't been privy to any of them. We'll get back to this because it's not a doomsday scenario about Agile, it's just to illustrate the point. In this same 2 organizations, I was part of an ePMO, which became an Agile Center of Excellence, but this was established in the business side, and it had loftier goals, servant leadership, and let's use the Spotify model, and let's look at product. So the ambition was to have more impact, as we could see, because it was more of a cultural change. The problem was these 2 never interconnected, despite what the Business Agile Center of Excellence was promoting. When you got into the team level at IT were continuing their methodology-driven transformation. And no matter what the Agile COE said, the war was still between business and technology. So needless to say that we didn't really achieve anything in the high benefits area. So what's the solution to this? Let me just clear this away. Make it easier to look at. All right, so to recap, what have we seen so far? The executive committee that makes the decisions about the yearly budget, about the yearly portfolio of what we want to do. Those types of decisions, yes, they're about vision, they're about culture, and they are at the enterprise level. But they're standing alone, disconnected up there. We've seen that local product or team-driven Agile methodology changes tend to live in the low impact area, right? They do impact teams and the teams the way they work, but there's no connection there. A very important concept here, and it goes back to the silos as well. Internal stakeholders. I'm talking about governance, compliance, risk, audit, finance, procurement, HR, security, data, privacy, enterprise architecture. Whom have I forgotten? Probably about 7. Each of these have their own forms, each of these have their own processes, each of these ask for redundant information, each of these are actually managing to their own silo and managing for their own success, not the enterprise's success. So how do you bring these people on board? I have experience with audit, for example. I can tell you that in a minute. So this is another key set of stakeholders that need to be brought into this. But how? They have very little intersection with the executive committee, because the executive committee decides on these things, and they also say to these governance stakeholders, comply. It's your job to comply. Make sure that we're not going to jail, but PMO, you execute, You comply, this is the portfolio for this year. Now, of course, we have transformation offices with digital transformations happening all of a sudden. All this is going on, and then you get an email saying, by the way, we started a digital transformation. What does that mean? Right? And usually the digital transformations are a bit disconnected. There's many different sort of parts of the organization automating and so on. But again, it's sort of floating. And there's really no, what project, once it's been funded, wants to take on a necessary, I don't know, API upgrade, or wants to take on a necessary back-end upgrade. Oh, no, I'm not paying for that. That should have been a project that was, approved at the executive level. Finally, we have the poor PMO, stuck in the middle with limited capabilities, limited authority, trying to make sense of all this with all this noise going on. So how do we escape that? We take the space that the PMO began in. We leverage the fact that within the PMO there are professionals who have dedicated their careers to creating these bridges, to creating these conversations. And what we do is we extend up and towards the left a new space based upon these same principles. That space should encompass, it's called the VMO, the Value Management Organization, and it should encompass transparency and communication with the executive committee. It should encompass all the players we just saw. It is an area of cooperation, of transparent collaboration. However, this picture is still wrong. I'll tell you why. It's too clean. Everybody's in the box. The reality, when you start, I've been doing this for years, and the reality looks more basically like this, which is still not bad. But all of these parts of the organization continue to have their reason to be. They continue having, the executive committee will obviously need to make decisions that don't necessarily have to go through the VMO. Right? The teams will not have to run to the VMO for their changing their own ways of working at the practices level, and so on and so forth. Right? The compliance partners, the control partners, obviously have to make sure that people stay out of jail and do not, break any regulatory mandates. So not everything happens within the VMO. But the VMO, basically, it is also not a huge new bureaucracy. It is a nexus, a virtual and collaborative, I said that word, but I'm going for more than that. It is the virtual embodiment of this desire to collaborate across all these silos and hierarchical parts of the organization. And that takes work, that takes time, that takes diplomacy, that takes enormous effort. I'll give you one example of where I was able to do this in one organization. So I was working with a large program. I was actually part of the Agile Center of Excellence. The program was running Agile methodologies, and we learned that there was going to be an audit, right? So basically, someone from the green group was going to come and audit this. And the teams were saying, oh, the auditors, why are they starting to come and bother us? Can't they leave us alone on that? What I explained and what my colleagues from the Center of Excellence explained, which was also part of the EPMO, said, you can't think like that. The internal auditors are team members. They are on our side. Their goal is not to shut us down. Their goal is to help ensure that whatever we're doing in the program, once we try to release it and get value to customers, that we're not breaking any regulations, that we're following our processes. And then I spoke with the auditing department, and I said, how do you usually go about this? Well, we submit a form, and you fill the form, then we send you emails if we have questions, and you respond by email. Then we send you back the form, and this can take up to 4 months. And I said, what if you just sent the auditor into the team for 3 weeks, sitting with them, and watch them work? And they said, we've never done that. Silence on the phone. Well, we can try. Everybody was like, whoa, what? And that's what happened. The auditor came, sat with the team, looked at all their processes live. We were able to establish, for example, traceability from a business requirement right down to code running in production, showing the auditor in each system how it jumped from one to the other. It just so happened that there was a DevOps pipeline that did this work very well, but she was able to see it in action. 3 weeks later, the report came back saying, this process, this team, this program is using the most auditable, transparent, clean process I have seen at the bank. I highly recommend it be studied for use elsewhere in the organization. But had we not, at the PMO and the Center of Excellence, said, try this, had we not broached the subject, no one had thought of this before. I could not believe that no one had thought of this before, but no one had tried. Maybe someone had tried in the past and it had failed, and success has many parents, but failure is an orphan. So whoever failed in the past at doing something like this maybe didn't talk about it, but it worked. It was one tiny example of the type of interaction within the organization that needs to happen for this VMO thing, this virtual space, to start actually yielding benefits and creating the conversations that move value to the customer and for all the stakeholders quickly in the right direction. Well, quickly, in the right direction, not necessarily quickly. Talk about strategy, the yearly strategy. When you have a construct like this that has those conversations, you're no longer all of a sudden in a rush to get all the strategy for the beginning of the fiscal year. You now have room to adapt because you know you're going to have the conversations. You don't have to nail down the full scope of every project in advance. You can do rolling wave, right, which has been in the PIM box since when? Right? We forget about rolling wave, decomposition, the things that have been in the PIM box for years. They're not anti-agile, they're just practices. An example of this, of an adaptive portfolio, right? So what does an adaptive portfolio look like? So a portfolio that is not nailed down, right? What would you do in a VMO? What would the conversations in a VMO look like in order to move towards an adaptive emergent portfolio, right? Well, you could definitely look at more criteria than the executive committee is normally used to looking at. The executive committee will normally, and I haven't been in very many I haven't sat with many CEOs myself, but we all know what the results look like. Usually it's financial gain or very rarely a risk reduction. But with an emergent PMO, basically, all of a sudden there are other criteria which become open to discussion, right? So it could be risk reduction, it could be, cost of delay. Cost of delay is an incredible tool, basically, that says, well, what is the price of not doing this now? What are the implications of not doing this now? And then you can actually compare apples and oranges. It's called CD3. This all of a sudden becomes one possibility, right? Also, various approaches to risk can be used. The important thing that happens is with more eyes, with more perspectives in the portfolio decisions, in the financing of what happens in that year, with more perspective in the decision becomes basically more flexible, more adaptable. Here's another example of how a VMO, because it is empowered to make more decisions and deeper decisions and more cross-boundary decisions. Let's look at something that you guys know extremely well as project managers. 5 projects, 5 teams or 5 individuals, doesn't matter, depends on the size of the organization, right? Everybody is working on everything. Now, what happens when we pursue utilization like this? You spend most of your time waiting for a team or waiting for an individual to free up. Knowledge work, studies have shown that knowledge work, the actual touch time, the actual time where each item in a list of things to do is being worked on is like 7 to 10%. Right? So you've got 7 to 10% touch time because of resource utilization. And the resource utilization is because of the silos and because of the shadow IT PMOs and because of the decisions that go up and down. We know that if we were to simply dedicate people, we could have the same number of projects, just dedicate a little smarter to fewer people per project, the wait time would go down significantly. And if I make this even more clear, this is the difference between resource utilization and a smarter allocation of people. But I ask you, in most organizations today, who has the authority to redistribute people like this? No one. No one has the authority to do this. The PMO tries, oh, we're a strong matrix, we need, but then they fight. If you have a strong PMO and strong projects, the big projects come and steal the people, right? Or if you have a situation where the functional managers are very strong, they will keep their best people for the projects that make them look good. It's human nature. Humans will follow the things that the system rewards them for. Right? The simple truth about this is right now, there is no one who has the authority to do this, which is why we see it so seldom. And Agile goes on about dedicated teams, dedicated teams. Remember, the Agile transformations are where? Bottom left. Low impact, low authority, small scale. Smaller teams, smaller teams. The rest of the organization goes, or dedicated teams. Yeah, you can say that, but I'm going to make sure that all of my people are allocated 120% because that's what my bonus is based on. And the PMO can't change that, and nobody has authority over me. I've been given the right to allocate my people as I see fit. So no one has the authority to do this. That's where the VMO comes in again with those conversations and this, let's talk about this. No one has the authority to do it. What else does no one have the authority to do? Alone. My message here is none of the pieces that I've shown you have the authority to do any kind of impact alone. So just winding down now, a couple of first steps, but just to hammer this particular nail once again, the reason it is important that someone have the authority to do proper reallocation of people like we just saw, these are well-studied phenomena. When it comes to people, if you're on one project, you've got 100% of your time, minus emails and meetings, okay. As you go on to 2, 3, and 4, and 5, look at 5 projects. 80% of your day is cognitive waste, context switching. So when everybody's on 5 projects, no one is actually working. It's that simple. Nothing moves. Another way of looking at it, this is at the personal level. This is the toll it takes at a personal level. I saw one organization where one developer who was a specialist, a database specialist, I asked him, how many projects are you on? He said, 17. You're on 17 projects. Yep. How does that even work? He said, it doesn't. I spend 4 hours a week doing my timesheet. True story. Again, look if you had a VMO that was able to basically prioritize projects in an intelligent way with an emergent portfolio approach. When we create project teams and tear them down and create project teams and tear them down, you wind up with all this gray space of ramp up and ramp down. look how little white space of work there is at the top. There is truth to what the Agile community says about dedicated team. Of course, dedicated team, because look, it's all white space. But who has the authority to dedicate a team? Not the PMO, not the Agile Transformation Office. Those types of decisions, you need a stronger body, the VMO. So, I mean, this is a very, I've touched upon numerous topics, and obviously in the time we have, I mean, I could go on, but I want to also spend some time with your questions and comments and strong emotional reactions, hopefully. But invitation, right, is the first key to creating this VMO. It shouldn't, let me put it this way. If you're trying to create a collaborative body, the last thing you want to do is do it by diktat. Now we have a VMO. That's the exact opposite, right? Again, we saw that we started from the core PMOs and we extended the capabilities and influence of the PMO until it ceased being a PMO and became a VMO. Use the talent, use the skills, use the experience that are within the PMO as a starting basis, because we're all used to the diplomacy and we're all used to the complexities as project managers and as agile organizational coaches. We're used to the complexities of this. We are a good place to start, basically. Transparency and trust. How do you establish transparency and trust where none existed before? That's the audit example. There was no transparency and trust. It was forms and emails until someone said, hey, can you send an auditor into the team? Try something. Even if it seems like the answer will be no, if you don't ask, you will never know. I'm always astounded by the things that are possible when you just actually ask and not assume that things are the way they are because they have to be that way. Things are the way they are because they have to be that way. Things are the way they are because they were permitted to endure that way and were not challenged. And there's a way of challenging and being an organizational agent of change that can be done in a diplomatic fashion, but still with pride and with confidence. And this all takes time, lots of time. One of the organizations I was with had been on this journey for 13 years and still weren't there. You get benefits from day one, small, incremental, accruing benefits. But it's a journey. There is no end goal. There is no perfect end state. There can't be, because things are changing so fast that once you hit the end goal that you thought was your target 3 years ago, that target has moved and you've just reached nowhere, basically. And that is pretty much that. I'd like to point out, again, my thank you to my partner, for several years now, I've had the honor of working with the folks from Alvision. Frank, Rick, Frederick, you want to stand up and so people know who you are? That's it's Frank's fault I'm here from Canada with you. Also, my wife Judy is here. We actually took the time to take a wonderful week's vacation here in Germany. We were in Munich, we were in Nuremberg, and here in Frankfurt today, so there she is. In the material, there's some of the stuff that I used in order to create this presentation. There's actually a book that's actually called From PMO to VMO. It's a very interesting read. It provides a somewhat different approach to what I'm talking about. It almost gives a bit of a recipe, which is not bad. I personally have found, well, you've probably guessed by now that I'm not very fond of recipes, but this one has some great ideas and it has so it was very inspirational in this talk, so definitely want to look that up. And beyond budgeting, about finances. Finance does not have to be yearly. Anyway, all of these books and resources are of interest. Now, how much time do we have left? Plenty.
I think we have 5 minutes for
5 minutes.
1 or 2 questions, something like this. Depends on the answer. On the questions.
So an violent emotional reaction. No, I meant. Das ist nicht, was ich meinte. I wanted something to challenge, say, this is nonsense, Daniel. I don't believe a word you said, and this is not how I've seen it. And what do you think of?
Okay, here.
Hi. You mentioned that the VPMO should be or needs the authority to make a lot of decisions that a PMO cannot do today.
Uh-huh.
On the other hand, you're saying this should not be, or this authority should not be given by mandate, but by collaboration and inviting.
That's right.
How do you manage that? And isn't that actually a contradiction?
No, it's not. But it's a good question because that's what I wanted. Someone, hey, you've contradicted yourself. The way to build it is through collaboration, through invitation, through transparency. Once you get there, you turn it into a dictatorship. No, I'm kidding. Once you have that, basically, you continue operating that way, right? But what you have is, together, this virtual body now has access to sufficient decision makers in sufficient places and at sufficient levels of authority to collaboratively, if the decision needs to be made, there are no more impediments. So nothing is blocked because you've talked in one place, in one entity, the VMO. You have had a discussion where everybody who needed to know about it and anybody who could oppose it or be in favor of it has heard it, and you fight it out or talk it out within the VMO, but once the VMO decides, then there's no one else left to say no. But you arrived at that consensus or whatever together. Does that make sense? No, say it. Oh, yes.
And that's usually what humans don't like, right? So
That is the...
that's the opposite. That's the contradiction.
Yes. So you've hit the nail on the head. You're definitely asking everyone to give up an illusion of power, right? But to them, it's not an illusion, right? We see it's an illusion because we see that their power isn't really working, or it's only working as an impediment. But what I've seen, and I saw it with the auditors, and I saw it also with security. I've seen it with other regulatory and even with some executives. I had a CIO tell me once, Daniel, now that we're working this way, we're talking about an emergent portfolio. He said, remind me never to give anyone more than $5 million at a time ever again. Because before the habit was, here's 20 million, you do this, beginning of the fiscal year, we don't want to hear, we just want to hear green status until you deliver on November. And what we were saying was, no, why don't you take an agile approach, break it down into chunks, but only fund the chunks. But his power was, I have 20 million, I'm going to give you 20 million. And to him, it was almost like a demotion to say, well, I'm only going to give 5. He felt cheap. He said, I want to give the 20 million. He said, no, right? Give 5 million and then look at the results. You may want to change. So he was an example of someone who gave up his perceived decision making and looked at the results that the program was giving in a way that was far more frequent than he was used to. So that was a very strong moment as well when he said, "Yep, thank you." And another one here. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a question relating to the entity of the VMO. So it sounds like you're describing a person to take charge in that direction. Let's say I said to you now, we have this person over here. We think this person is the right VMO for us. How would you assess if that person actually carries the qualities that you would desire in a VMO?
Okay, so let me just rephrase that so I understand. So are you asking me about an individual or?
Yeah, exactly, because potentially you described that nobody has the power to do what a VMO has to do. So essentially somebody would have to take this initiative, or are you describing a group of people? And my question would have been,
Yes.
what characteristics are you looking for in a group, a person, or whatever, to be a good VMO from your perspective?
Oh, okay, yes. Okay, very good question. So I don't think that a single individual would be like the face of the PMO, the VMO necessarily, because that would detract from the fact that it is a collaborative, multi-entity, super entity. But the qualities that you would want of anyone who is collaborating within the VMO on behalf of their part of the organization, unity of purpose, someone who believes in unity of purpose. So I remember once I was basically giving a training at a large bank that I was working with, and we were into this discussions, and well, it's in Toronto, and this bank has like 3 skyscrapers, well, many more actually, but we were in the 32nd floor, and we had started having this discussion around, who gets to decide what, and we had exactly this sort of multi-entity conversation, and I said, unity of purpose is what you're looking for. So I pointed to the skyscraper that we saw through the window, and that was the huge logo of the bank. And I said, understand that you're not working for your part. You should be working for the clients who bank with that logo. And that's what everyone should be doing. You're working for the clients who have entrusted their money and their financial future to the entity that is that logo. And that logo is all of you. Right? So that unity of purpose, that willingness to set aside siloed mentality, set aside also the absolute desire to be better than the next guys in the organization. And this also has to do with human nature as well. But human nature, as I said earlier, most people that I know get up and go to work in the morning with good intentions, with the best of intentions. I've met very few really ill-intended people. But the systems that we work in, if they are rewarding basically siloed behavior, if the way we give bonuses, if the way that we recognize people, if headcount is power and empires and fiefdoms within an organization are the biggest toxic enemy of creating something like this. No one will want to create a VMO in an organization where your bonus is based upon how well your division did and not how well you collaborated with others. So the first condition to be able to even think about something like this is to analyze how do the parts of the organization interact? Do they compete? Do they talk to each other? What is the collaboration like? And if you can start creating a sense of unity of purpose within the different parts, and that alone can take time. That alone can, you may have to wait until, there may be certain leaders that, for whom it's too late. I've actually joked that sometimes getting to starting with this, in some organizations you may need some senior leaders to retire. That sounds sort of defeatist, but I have seen organizations where this will not be possible just yet. Some things might have to happen in the makeup of the organization. But vast majority of organizations, there is enough goodwill to work with, and people understand well enough that collaboration will eventually get the organization as a whole further for all stakeholders, for the employees, for the clients. But you have to reinforce and you have to give people looking for positive social proof that non-selfish behavior is actually going to somehow advance the organization and advance the individuals who constitute that organization. Ooh, that was a long answer.
Okay, thank you, Daniel,
Okay.
for this great, inspiring speech and for the little discussion.
Yep.
I saw some more questions, but we are unfortunately
Out of
running
time?
out of time. Next speech is waiting there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
We'll continue in 5 minutes. Very thank you. I think now I know what VMO is. Thanks for this.